Welcome to the Jeffers Brief, only on Contra Radio Network.
And hello again, John Jeffers here on Tuesday, April 3rd. Welcome to the Jeffers Brief. I'm your host. I do not have all the answers. I am not an expert, but I do pass along valuable, meaningful information to you. All right, today, let's talk about the EMP threat. It's real. For you new preppers out there, EMP, electromagnetic pulse attack. We've talked about it before. We've done a few shows on it. If you search the archives there in Podbean, you'll see it. We talked about Dr. Fry. We talk about what an EMP does, how it works, what it is. But anyways, the EMP threat is real. And we got this from Survival Sullivan, and I had to look for it. I said, you know what, this is really good information. I've got to get it out to you guys. And I'll tell you why. Because the government is not prepared. By Tara Dodrell. It's true. But before we get started, I better put the phone on silent. There, I remembered. You know, North Korea claims to be able to hit the United States mainland with a ballistic missile and an EMP weapon. Well, okay. It is long past time to not only start taking the threat of an EMP attack far more seriously, but to educate yourself about the impact of electromagnetic pulse will truly be. Stop. One thing I want to point out as we get started here, the Chinese have is it the Chinese? I think the Chinese have a satellite called the Shining Star. Most satellites travel in west to east direction, in orbit around the planet. But not this one. This Chinese satellite goes in a polar to polar, north to south orbit. Which brings it over the United States quite a few times. Now, why would the Chinese put their Shining Star satellite on a polar-to-polar orbit? Communication satellites, like I said, go west to east. Generally. It is said, mind you, it is said that the reason the Chinese have a satellite going on polar-to-polar type orbit is because, well, let's put it this way. They say it's a weather satellite, but it's not. It's an EMP device. It's an EMP device. There you go. There you have it. There it is. Let's get back to it. For 8 whole years, the Obama administration shrugged off the threats shouted by the North Koreans as merely gibberish from a lunatic that could never come to fruition. Well, we now know how much of a true threat the technology amassed in North Korea is to our way of life. We know that now. So in September of last year, 2017, North Korea won a massive victory against the American people. You are not aware of this victory, and I'm not surprised. The mainstream media, oh, I know, say it ain't so, rarely ever covers EMP issues and is too busy debating President Trump's tweets about the rogue communist nation to report the news of substance to viewers. So during a national security meeting at the Pentagon, the Congressional Commission to Assess the Threat of EMP to the United States of America, also known as the EMP Commission, was indefinitely shut down. The team of volunteer engineers, scientists, and security experts was created in 2000 to study, identify, and assess EMP risk to our infrastructure and military. Now, there have been a handful of politicians over the years who have fought hard to put the EMP issue on the front burner and to do something to harden our power grid, stockpile necessary components to repair it after an Earth-directed X-class solar flare or an EMP attack, but have met roadblock after roadblock after roadblock and never really got anything accomplished. Like so many other mini commissions and task forces before it, no real results ever came out of the EMP Commission recommendations. That was the fault of the various career politicians in charge of Congress and not based upon the validity of reports produced by the Commission members. Now, the EMP Commission was made impotent during the Barack Obama years, leaving America without even a targeted task force to deal with an emerging threat from North Korea and beyond. So the House Committee on Armed Services created the commission to assess the threat to the United States from EMP attack as part of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2001. Hearings were held and recommendations were uttered in both 2004 and 2008. The hardening of power grid transformers was a top item on the agenda. Stop it here. Take a note. Power grid transformers are extremely hazardous to your health. I mean, the components that make it up are extremely poisonous. Most of them come from China. They barely even make them here in the United States anymore because they are so toxic. But we need them. Got to have them. All right. But anyways, let's get back to it. But for some reason, even though simple low-tech solutions exist, to do so, the task just never made it into the budget. So hardening the transformers would not prevent the catastrophic impact of an EMP attack on modern vehicles. All the sensitive electronic devices we own, or businesses and utilities we use to function. Yet, they are the best bet at saving or mitigating damage to the power grid. Now, the work conducted by the EMP Commission revealed key risks to both our general infrastructure and the power grid. The risk revealed also included threats to the functionality of the federal government and to our nuclear power stations. Now, and the type of irony that can only occur in Washington, D.C., along with all the dysfunction, just a few days before the EMP Commission was officially shut down, General John E. Hyten, the commander of the United States Strategic Command, uttered warnings about an EMP attack and the effect it would have on the country. General Hyten referred to an EMP attack as both a dangerous and realistic threat to America. The Strategic Command leader described what would happen if a high-altitude EMP was set off quite simply. He says, aptly noting that every light would go off around the country. Every car would stop working. Accurate if it was not at least manufactured before 1970. Perhaps 1950. And all our smartphones would immediately stop working. The good general did not sugarcoat his urgent warning about the impact of an EMP attack, which was quite refreshingly honest, even if few ever got to hear his words. Hyten said it would take months to years to repair the damage caused by the electromagnetic pulse attack. Stop it here. Dr. Pry, an EMP expert who was also on the EMP Commission, noted this. An EMP attack will set our country back technology-wise, get this, 150 to 160 years. So that puts us roughly back to the 1850s, 1860s. And yet, they're still worried about, oh my God, Trump this, Trump that. That's what the Democrats are worried about in the mainstream media. Those little lapdogs that they are. Anyways. Yet in the wake of these substantial and fact-supported warnings, Congress still decided to nix the EMP Commission. Why? Well, you know, and so do I. The answer might boil down to pure politics. The EMP Commission had faced some stiff opposition from the energy industry, including, get this, the North American Energy Reliability Commission, also known as NERC, N-E-R-C, and the Federal Energy Reliability Commission, also known as FERC, F-E-R-C, among others. Could lobbyists have been putting immense pressure on the politicians who supported the EMP Commission disbanding? Were political contributions at stake? Maybe, probably. Knowing it's D.C., I say there's an 85% chance yes. So you see, dear leaders, the federal government neither owns nor completely controls the nation's power grid. In fact, no single entity, government or otherwise, can make rules relating to the power grid that the entire energy industry has to follow. So making strong suggestions about this vital piece of infrastructure is about all they can do in many cases. Hold it there. I disagree with that. The government can, in fact, issue regulatory, not laws, regulatory guides and to the companies that control the nation's power grid. As a matter of fact, if it ever went to court, which it would never go to court, because all the government has to say is these words: it is in the interest of public safety. Case dismissed. Thank you. Game over. The federal government has far more control over the coal industry through environmental mandates than it does over the power grid that could be destroyed by an act of war in the blink of an eye, causing the deaths of tens of millions of people and changing life as we know it in America for an unknown amount of time. EMP myths, yeah, there's lots of them out there. But what is the biggest EMP myth of all time? That the United States federal government is prepared for such a cataclysmic, the end of the world as we know it, shit hits the fan, apocalyptic long-term doomsday disaster? Yes. And I throw in every prepper buzzword there is because I feel it necessary to firmly drive home the fact that an EMP would change life in this country both immediately and perhaps forever. Now, this report is going to focus on boldly pushed myths that we are safe, the government is prepared, and the power grid is sound and protected. The information you are about to read should scare the hell out of you. By the time these myths are proven true, the worst doomsday disaster known to man will have occurred, and it will be far too late to begin preparing for it. The EMP attack from North Korea is real. Last year, the world learned North Korea launched 2 satellites into orbit that are capable of creating an EMP attack. Where could they get that technology? Both the trajectory and the altitude of the satellites show them to quite possibly evade the scanners used by the United States National Missile Defense System, according to Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. The national security expert is now a member of the NOAA project, as is the big daddy of the prepping movement, William R. Fortune, and Newt Gingrich. But before dedicating himself to educating the public about the real EMP threat, he was a government official. Dr. Pry is also the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and the director of U.S. Nuclear Strategy Forum. Both are congressional advisory boards, and Pry served on the Congressional EMP Commission. House Armed Services Committee was a CIA analyst and a member of the Congressional Strategic Posture Commission. The man knows of what he's talking about. He does. Bill Fortune's cult classic and prepping handbook, 1 Second After, was even cited on the floor of Congress during the EMP Commission hearings as an example of what America would face and the likely result of an EMP attack. Now, the bestseller should be required reading for every man and woman running for Congress. Perhaps then something might be done to protect our great country. Sadly, I doubt half the populace even knows what EMP stands for and why they should care. But, I'll stop it there. But, comes for Contra Radio Network. You listen here, we've been talking about it for a couple of years now. And we're doing it again because it's that important. Because a lot of new people have joined Contra Radio Network. They have. And they're new. And they don't know. They probably never even heard of this thing. But anyways, let's get back to it. Even though some mainstream scientists in America mocked the first underground nuclear test by North Korea, that too should send chills up your spine. The explosion was not substantially large. In fact, it was less than a 1 kiloton blast. Far less than what our nuclear bombs are capable of producing. But a 1 kiloton blast is powerful enough to trigger what? Let's say it together, people. Enough to trigger an EMP incident. And the test by North Korea has significantly increased since then. Now, North Korea may not yet be able to detonate a nuclear weapon over the American mainland, but the same devastating effect, perhaps an even worse outcome, would happen if they unleash an EMP weapon. A surface nuclear bomb would destroy a city and the surrounding geographic area, but an EMP weapon could destroy the United States from coast to coast in an instant. Even if it took only 12 months to repair the power grid, as some government agencies claim is the worst case scenario, boy, did they deserve the Golden Crack Pipe Award. The entire nation would be as vulnerable and desperate as a newborn baby until deployed military could arrive back to protect the nation, and an outside entity, like the United Nations, stepped in with food, water, medical, and fuel aid for starters. And you know what that leads to, right? So information, the mainstream media, and politicians are shielding us from. And why are they shielding us from? Because we may not be able to handle the truth. Most politicians look at us as look at the American public as their children. I'm not a child. I'm a man. I'm an adult. And I object. You want to talk about being offended? Torque me up. You have some politician look at me and say that. By God, he and I are going to have at it. Now, the mainstream media tries to downplay the impact an EMP attack would have on our daily lives, which they shouldn't, because there is an EMP attack. All those idiots in the mainstream media immediately become unemployed. So while attempting to convince us the odds of it actually taking place are slim to none, they are not only wrong on both counts, but their myths about EMPs could cost lives and such a man-made or natural incident occurs. Now, career politicians from both sides of the aisle also try to convince us there is nothing to really worry about when it comes to EMPs. They largely claim such an event is unthinkable, but it does happen. The government will be there to help and get the power grid up and running again in a reasonable amount of time. Stop it there. Look, if they expect the government, our government, to use our tax dollars to repair the grid, the power grid, then I say the government has an obligation to step in with regulatory regulatory amendments to ensure that the power grid is hardened against EMP, and it can be. Back in the 80s, when President Reagan, God rest his soul, pushed through, he knew about EMPs, and they managed to push it through with enough money and time. They were able to get almost all of U.S. military bases hardened against EMP. So their myths could also cost lives and ultimately the collapse of not only our economy, but the eventual loss of freedom when the power vacuum created. Our crumbled federal government paves the way for local, regional, or state governments to spring up in its place. Have you seen the now canceled show Revolution? That will give you a pretty detailed glimpse into what life under brutal warlords and post-power grid failure can look like. Now, for you new people out there, what is an EMP? Well, here we go. I'm going to tell you about it. An EMP is a sudden burst of electromagnetic radiation that could stem from several causes: a solar flare, a coronal mass ejection, CME, a fluctuating magnetic field, or a powerful high-energy explosion like a nuclear explosion, or from a man-made EMP bomb or similar weapon. A tremendous power surge creates and sends high-voltage pulses and fluctuating electrical currents that change the electrical fields throughout our electrical grid. The sensitive tech gadgets that now run our daily lives and government would immediately be reduced to nothing more than useless and expensive paperweights. So let's talk about the top 5 government EMP preparedness myths. Number 1, it can't happen here. Way wrong answer. This may actually be the mother of all EMP myths. Anyone who thinks that or tries to convince you of that is speaking from pure ignorance or is motivated to hide the truth. Attacks on our power grid have already happened. During the summer of 2013, a power grid attack happened in Arizona. Don't recall hearing about this shocking event? Guess what? You're not alone. Most Americans didn't, thanks to the mainstream media and politicians who should have been spurred into action by this potentially devastating act, but we're not. If the homemade bomb placed beneath a large 50,000 gallon diesel tank at the power grid substation had detonated as planned, a minimum of 30,000 Americans would not only have been left without, they would have been thrust into an off-the-grid existence until all the horrendous damage could be repaired. Now, the Arizona facility was deemed, quote, a critical transformer substation, unquote, by experts quoted by the local press. It was located along where? Our southern border with who? Mexico. The potent bomb did not require transport by a big U-Haul truck. Quite to the contrary, the explosive device would have fit in the palm of your hand. Was this and similar incidents in Tennessee and California acts of terrorism? We will never know. The culprit still remains at large. Number 2, the power grid is protected. Way wrong answer. Wrong again. The power grid stations throughout America are not fortresses, not by a long shot. The criminals or terrorists who garnered access to a power grid facility near Nogales, Arizona, simply had to cut a hole in the fence and walk right inside to try and wreak havoc. The Tennessee TVA Watts Bar nuclear plant power grid attack happened during the wee hours of the morning of March 2013. A gunman, a security guard was unable to catch, rowed a boat up the waterway that runs adjacent to the facility and just walked right inside. That same year, unknown criminals, again, possibly terrorists, garnered access to California's Pacific Gas and Electric Metcalf substation in South San Jose around 1 a.m. through manholes. After cutting fiber optic cables, the suspects caused the disruption of not only landlines but 911 service in the local area and cell phone blackout. Before they left, the still unknown culprits fired about 100 rifle rounds into transformers at the power grid facility. Oil leaked out of the transformers and caused the essential electric service component to overheat and fail. At the time, Democratic California Congressman Henry Waxman declared the attack on the California substation as an unprecedented and sophisticated attack on the power grid, complete with, you guessed it, military-style weapons. Never let a crisis go to waste, right, guys? So anytime a semi-automatic rifle is used, liberals are quick to refer to the firearm as being what? Military-style, or an dreaded assault rifle. It would have been far more accurate and informative to tell the masses the suspect shot up an unprotected, vital piece of infrastructure. 17 transformers to be exact, without any real resistance or even awareness that they were there until it was too late. Now, calling the suspects snipers who used military-style weapons was surely meant to make the people behind the attack sound scary, in what was possibly an attempt to distract the public from the truly frightening aspect of the incident. that it all could unfold both so quickly and easily, and how much worse it could have been if truly skilled snipers or hackers had been involved. Have many more similar or more severe attacks at power grid substations taken place since 2013? Well, none that the MSM, the mainstream media, or the government is really telling us about, at least. I think our power grid is protected just about as well as our borders. Number 3, the power grid is fully functional. If you ever hear someone, either in person or on the news, trying to convince you of this, know now that it is an outright lie, or they have been tricked into believing their deceiving words. Just because you flip a switch and the lights come on every day does not mean the power grid is fully functional. The antiquated system is massively overtaxed, strained to the max, and highly vulnerable to surges and the additional drain placed upon it during extreme storms, heat waves, and winter weather. The demand on the nation's electrical grid has grown more than tenfold in the past decade, but expansion and repairs to these systems have not kept pace. The American Society of Civil Engineers grades all vital pieces of national infrastructure at regular intervals. None of the essential services, facilities, or roads scored well. Making the honor roll is still a dream for nearly all of them. The one piece of infrastructure that is vital to our health, economy, and daily life, the power grid, scored only a D+ grade after the engineering review. Does that make you feel safe and secure? No, we're too worried about gun control to worry about that. So North Korea, other rogue nations and terrorists have shouted their hatred of America from the rafters, from the tops of mountaintops, and disavowed our way of life, covet what we have except our freedoms, and are both eager and willing to do anything within their means to destroy us. The American people know this. Well, half the American people know it. The other half is still believing that the government is the be-all, end-all for their lives. The politicians know this. Yet, the glass jar of our infrastructure, the power grid, remains overtaxed, unprotected, and increasingly vulnerable to attacks. Billions of dollars earned by hardworking Americans are sent abroad to give aid to non-Americans, even in those countries that have shouted rants of hate against our country. But there's not enough money in the budget to harden the power grid, right? Tens of millions of dollars are spent on pork projects annually, like a safe tunnel crossing for turtles venturing across the highway, and the mating habits of crabs. But there is not enough money available to fix the power grid. Until the American people force the public servants sent to Washington to represent our interest that the power grid and protection from an EMP is a priority for us, it is impossible to think that will ever become a priority for enough for them to get this gaping hole of a problem fixed. Number 4. If the power grid fails, the government can fix it. Wrong answer. The government might want to be able to fix it, but the collective they do not currently possess the means. Although President Donald Trump is working to fix this self-destructive trend, hardly anything is made in America anymore, and that includes transformers and other necessary power grid repair parts. If an EMP attack happens, some government maintenance guy somewhere is not going to be able to stroll over to the nearby warehouse and load all the parts he needs onto a truck and go fix the power grid. Either a naturally occurring EMP, shit hits the fan disaster like a solar flare or an EMP man-made bomb, could take down the power grid not only in the United States, but on a worldwide scale. Some of the most vital power grid components are manufactured overseas in Germany. Unless most of the parts and pieces need to repair the power grid are protected by a Faraday cage, they will be useless pieces of junk also. So let's ask the $64 question. How many of those necessary parts and pieces needed to repair the power grid are sitting in a Faraday cage? Huh? Yeah, right. You say Faraday cage, most of the freaking politicians will go, huh? What? Is that for Free-range chickens? Yeah. Official estimates by government agencies and officials claim that the power grid could be repaired and go back online within a matter of days or weeks. It is not based on sound logic or currently available resources. It will take months, in an extremely best case scenario, and months to years in a far more likely series of events. It would even require an EMP to take down our power grid. Shortly after leaving her post as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano said it was a matter of when, not if, an act of cyber warfare substantially impacted the power grid. There are entire offices filled with cyber hackers attempting to hack into our power grid, with the ultimate goal of taking it down completely. And not just rogue, but friendly countries, like Russia and Iraq, both of which American taxpayers are footing the bill for humanitarian aid on an annual basis. The upgrading power grid component to include more sensitive electronics to function with smart meters adds even more venues to attack open to cyber hackers. Stop it there. Last year, Commonwealth Edison put a damn smart meter on my house. Yeah, I didn't want it. An EMP and cyber attacks are two different animals, but they could prompt the end of the world as we know it result. A down power grid that sends America and everyone living. And everyone living here into an 1800s existence for an undetermined amount of time. Nearly every year, sometimes twice a year, I have the displeasure of writing a headline that reads something like Earth dodges a bullet, solar flare near miss, solar flares powerful enough to take down or disrupt the nation's electric grid happen on a nearly routine annual basis. Since 1859, we have been lucky enough to avoid an X-class Earth-directed solar flare. But how long will our luck hold? Telegraphs, the most advanced technology of the time, not only burst into flames when the CME hit, so did the papers of the desk of their operators. An Earth-directed CME missed our planet by only a couple days in 2012. If Earth had passed through the CME only slightly earlier, we would all be living just like the Founding Fathers once did. Number 5. The death toll won't be too high. Wrong answer. This deadly power grid EMP myth will likely cause a lack of preparedness or death of tens of millions of our fellow Americans. Although the somewhat fluctuating EMP death toll estimate by FEMA states otherwise, preparedness experts like Fortune and former government officials brave enough to speak out, like past CIA Director James Woolsey, staunchly disagree. The non-government EMP and power grid down experts estimate up to 90% of Americans would be dead within 12 to 18 months after such a critical event. During a chat with Bill Fortune, we talked about one of the least discussed causes of EMP death. Killed by airplane. Even though Bill informed me there are about 7,000 planes flying in the sky above our head at any given moment, passenger and crew deaths were not the primary cause of death focused upon during our conversation. But when an EMP happens, the sensitive electronics in various aircraft that are within the various aircraft would abruptly cease to function, causing 7,000 or so plane crashes. When those planes crash, firefighters will not be able to roll their engines and rush to the rescue, leaving the jet-fueled flames to rage unchecked. People and livestock will not be able to all run out of the fires, causing more deaths and casualties in need of ambulances, which will also not be coming. Now, we all watched in horror, either live or during the thousands of replay footage, when radical Islamic terrorists turned planes into bombs and ran them into buildings. Even though the building the crashing planes will be hitting this time will be unguided, the end result will be the same. Dirt may not burn, but the crops growing in the fields, the sparked brush fires roar across, will be ruined. Waterways, the only source of the essential liquid after a power grid failure, will become contaminated with debris, including floating corpses of people running for their life to put out the flames of their clothing while trying to escape the pain. Even if by some miracle the federal government could get the power grid back on just a few weeks after an EMP attack, in spite of all the reasonable thinking to the contrary, the death toll and the economic impact by the fires would be monumentally crushing for the nation. So ponder for a moment what society will devolve into if no electricity is available on a nationwide scale for only a few weeks, which is a fairy tale time frame for the necessary repairs to take place. Power grid down and EMP fatality causes starvation, exposure, rioting, looting, lack of medical care, fires caused by the EMP, airplanes, intentionally by rioters and innocent people by simply trying to stay warm, boil water or purify it or cook food, and 7 is a lack of water. FEMA and other federal agencies conduct drills to prep for an EMP, many of which are merely tabletop drills. This tiny step in awareness is a good idea, but does nothing to mitigate the underlying problem. The fragility of the power grid does not create EMP-hardened vehicles to deliver food, water, and medicine to the people. It is highly doubtful that government agencies have even taken into consideration the violence, deaths, and the creation of territories controlled by powerful warlords that are created when prison inmates and mental health patients are once again free to roam the streets. Prison officers, hospital staffers, police officers, firefighters, and EMTs are local heroes, but it would be foolish to think they will all survive the initial days of the EMP, can get to work, have any vehicles or tools to do their jobs after the disaster, or be willing to leave their own families in the unsafe post-crap hits the fan world. Do you honestly think the government has enough emergency supply stockpile to deliver to the masses to begin with? Emergency aid response has improved since Katrina, but the wave of hurricanes in the summer and early fall of 2017 clearly illustrated how quickly depleted the stored resources can be and how long it will take them to get delivered. When the vehicles are still functional and resupply from store shelves is feasible. 90% of the population death toll prediction after a power grid failure or an EMP disaster is entirely realistic, despite what the federal government wants us to believe. Only those who are prepared with both skills and stockpiled preps to live off-grid, are located away from a city or major highway, will have a solid chance at survival. Now, if you have not read 1 Second After and Fortune's 2 follow-up books and the Lights Out saga by David Crawford, consider digging into them immediately. Essential power grid, EMP myth debunking, survival homework, etc. It would be inaccurate to state the United States federal government has not embarked on any solid EMP preparedness plans. They have, for themselves. There are 3 that we know of EMP-proof underground facilities for government officials and their loved ones to flee to in case they say shit hits the fan scenario, like the one being posed by the North Korea. The Norks. The Norks. Number 1 is Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, Virginia. Public has never had access to images, videos, or tours inside Mount Weather, had it not been for an airplane crash into the mountain during the 1970s. I doubt we would even know it existed. The bunker encompasses about 500 acres, approximately a 1-hour drive from D.C. It reportedly functions like a mini-city and even includes its own fire department and law enforcement entity. Number 2, the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania. This facility is also referred to as Site R and is located about 6 miles from Camp David. It has long been rumored that an underground bunker tunnel connects the presidential retreat with the Cold War complex. Truman signed off on the creation of the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in 1950. It has long been dubbed the Second Pentagon. Multiple additions and improvements have been made to the complex since then, including a $13.5 million upgrade in 1989. It is rumored to contain presidential living quarters and enough space and resources to house approximately 3,000 people for at least 30 days. Number 3, the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado. If the heat signature coming out of North Korea increases, the staff inside the mountain will know it first and almost immediately. If shooting down a missile with an EMP weapon on it is going to happen, the alert will almost assuredly come out of the Cheyenne Mountain NORAD complex. Will they be quick enough? Would it work? There is simply no way to know until it happens. A tour of the facility is extremely rare, but it has happened and some nondescript photos are floating around the internet. A few non-mainstream media reports prior to Donald Trump's election as President of the United States maintained the 3 Cold War-era bunker facilities designed to protect government officials and their families in case of nuclear attack were getting upgrades. Well, what do you think? Is it true? Could it be? Look, I'm about 10 minutes over. I like to try and keep these at a half hour. Don't forget, tell your friends about CRN. Have them listen to the podcast, to Live 365. We're there, too, in case you get too burned out. And don't forget, we got the giveaways. Giving away 2 things. Seed Vault with seeds. Perfect for storing in your supply catch. And 1 Baofeng radio. You're saying, well, why do you have 1? Why not 2? Well, I'll tell you. Because CRN is an Amazon affiliate, you can buy the other one through CRN. If you would, that'd be great. It helps support CRN. So, yeah, then you have 2 radios. All right. John Jeffers here for the Jeffers Brief on Contra Radio Network. Only on Contra Radio Network. My Prepper and Patriot friends, I say this to you. Be safe, be alert, and be vigilant. I'm John Jeffers here at the Contra Radio Network. Thanks for listening.